She has written 17 books, including the novels Mistress of Spices. That was the one that I first got hooked on with her writing. Sister of My Heart, Before We Visit the Goddess, Palace of Illusions, and now, just out, and we'll be talking about it a little bit today, if you would, The Forest of Enchantments. She's also the author of several collections of poetry and short stories. She won an American Book Award, a Penn Josephine Miles Award, an Italian, I'm told, equivalent of the Nobel Prize, the Premio Scano, and an Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award. She teaches in the very distinguished creative writing program at University of Houston, where she is the McDavid Professor of Creative Writing. She also serves on the advisory board of two organizations, and I think we'll talk about them a little bit later. Maitri, which is in the Bay Area, and Daya, isn't it? Daya, yeah. Daya in Houston, I think, yeah, Daya. Maitri means a female friend, a woman's female friend. Daya means compassion, and both of these are organizations that work with survivors of domestic abuse. And Chitra has been active in that throughout her career. I've admired her work for many years. I used several of her books in courses that I taught at the University of Iowa, starting with Mistress of Spices, and then later Palace of Illusions for a course on the Mahabharata that I taught. And on both occasions, and this is how I got to know Chitra, she very graciously responded to I think an email inquiry initially and then a phone conversation, and she agreed to do a Skype with my class so that my students had the thrill of interviewing and talking to and questioning the author that they had been reading, and it was a wonderful experience that I remain grateful for. So, we're going to start. We have sort of three subject areas drawn from Chitra's work that I want to invite her to talk to you about and share with you. I want to start out with the subject of mythology and the retelling of mythology, at which you are a mistress of words. So the two books, if you're not familiar with them, I bet they're downstairs, Palace of Illusions and the new one, Forest of Enchantments. These are books that retell the two great epics of the Indian subcontinent, the Mahabharata in Palace of Illusions and the Ramayana in Forest of Enchantments. But each of them is retold through the voice of the main heroine, the main female character, Draupadi in the Mahabharata and Sita in the Ramayana. So Chitra, you have engaged in these books with probably two of the most famous women in South Asian cultural history and sort of taken on their voices. What made you choose to do this is, I guess, what I want to start with.
Well, first of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to converse with you, Philip Bhai, because over the years we have really become friends, and in fact, your great expertise is in the myths and in the epics, so you gave me a lot of good feedback for my novels as well, so thank you for that. And yes, I wanted to write about these stories, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, because I grew up with them like many of you in the audience. I loved these stories, first introduced to me when I was little by my grandfather in oral retelling stories that, he would tell me in the evenings when I sat with him and listened, and they were magical stories. But one of the things that I started thinking about as I was getting older is that the stories, like epics all over the world, are very male-focused. They're all about the heroes, they're all about the battles, they're all about, the exploits of men and godmen. Even the weapons got more descriptive space than the women did. And I said to myself, okay, something's wrong over here. especially because the women characters are wonderful. They're amazing, they're fascinating, even the glimpses that we get, what they do. But we're not given an insight into their minds and their hearts, what they're feeling. And I want how they're thinking. How did they arrive at the decisions that they made? And often they occupy problematic cultural spaces because since not that much is explained about them in the original epics, they have been open to interpretation, often patriarchal interpretation, and I felt that their whole story was just not being told. So I wanted to imagine that story, and so I imagined Draupadi's story in Palace of Illusions. I wanted to see, she's often blamed as the person who starts the Mahabharata war, the kind of who provides incentive. Well, there's a lot more to her than that. She's often referred to in sniggering terms as the woman with 5 husbands, and wasn't that interesting and wasn't that fun? Well, there's a lot more to her, including how she became the woman with 5 husbands. So that was 10 years back. I didn't know what to expect. I was actually quite scared when the book was coming out. When I started writing the book, I have to tell you this story. Lightning hit our house. And my wonderful husband, Murthy, who is most supportive of my writing, he said, maybe this is a sign from the gods. And, so I gave it some thought, and then I chose to interpret that as like divine inspiration coming right into my home. So I went ahead and wrote the book, and I was thank you. I was very thankful that it was well received. I think there was a hunger to hear the stories of the women in their own voice. Panchali tells her own story, and that's what I wanted. 10 years after that, I wrote A Forest of Enchantments. And it took me that long because although right from the beginning I wanted to write Sita's story, that was a more difficult story to write. Because Sita is, for many people, the icon of Indian womanhood. When I grew up, elders often said to me, they would bless me, like, be like Sita. I had a slight problem with this. Because what they meant by be like Sita was be meek, be mild, be obedient, put up with whatever is given to you, do not create waves. And frankly, I didn't want to be like that, okay? But I was fascinated by Sita, and I felt that wasn't her whole story either, just like Panchali has another story. And I felt that I need to research it. So I researched a lot of different Ramayans. And I realized she is much stronger, much more outspoken, much braver. She deals with whatever, life hands her in a most courageous and heroic way. And so I wanted to tell that story. But again, it was a scary enterprise. It took me a long time also to understand that her strength lies in her forgiveness as well. So, that's how I came to write these books. And I was very thankful that when this book came out in India, it was well received. I didn't know what it would be. It's just Sita's grace.
Not only was it well received, folks, but it was the #1 bestseller at the Jaipur Literature Festival just now in Jaipur in January. Yeah, so I learned. That brings me, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about sources, because if you know the Mahabharata story well and you read Palace of Illusions, you'll see that it's a very smart reading of the Mahabharata. It's very sophisticated. I mean, by going into Draupadi, she casts a lot of light on all kinds of the many twists and turns and dark corners that the Mahabharata abounds in. And it's all very well informed by a deep understanding of the ancient Sanskrit text. With the Ramayana, of course, you're in a terrain of, underneath my shirt, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says Many Ramayanas, which was the title of a conference and a book that I participated in many years ago. But the Ramayanas are multiple, when my daughter Mira started reading Forest a couple of weeks ago, she called me up and she mentioned a particular incident early in the story, and she said, "Dad, did she make this up?" And I said, "No." But would you like to talk about some of the sources that you drew on?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So like you said, and like many people don't know, including myself before I really started researching, there are so many Ramayans, and they have many different versions of the same story. And that was wonderful and exciting for me because it showed me how multiplicitous was our culture and how welcoming of different angles of the same story. Now, as the story of the Ramayana has come down to us, especially through popular retellings, like in movies, etc., or in, Amar Chitra Katha and things of that kind, we think it's one single story. But really, there are many, many variations of it. One of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to stay close to these Ramayans. So none of the major incidents here, I have not made up any of them. Because I didn't want people to say, "Oh, sure, your Sita is like this," because you made up all these things that happened to her. So pretty much every single major incident here is from one Ramayana or the other. And there were 4 Ramayans that I looked at very seriously, and one that I looked at but did not use because I didn't feel it focused on what I was interested in. Valmiki was one of my main sources. The Kritibasi Ramayana, which is in Bengali and which therefore I could read in the original, was a delightful text. And perhaps because it came out of Bengal with its goddess culture, it was more interested in Sita and showed her in more spaces. I was also interested in the Kamba Ramayana, especially because of the relationship between Ravan and Sita.
You should say it's
Tamil, the Tamil Kamba Ramayana, yes. And I was also interested in the Adbhuta Ramayana, and I've used some interesting things from there that many people don't know. We won't give it away, right? We'll let people discover. But when you come to a section and you say, "Oh my God, is this true?" It's from one or the other of these Ramayans. The one that I did not use very much, although I love it for other reasons, is Tulsidas, because he focuses on Ram. I know, you love Tulsidas. Yes, yes, and Tulsidas is wonderful, but Sita is not his project, and Sita was my project, right?
I agree with you. Sita is not the most scintillating person in Tulsi Ramayana. I wrote a long blurb for the cover of her book, but they only used a tiny bit of it. But one of the things I said, and I want to just convey this to you, is that you created a Sitayana. Other people have used that word, but you really created one that manages to give Sita a strong voice, and I would say a kind of feminist voice and presence, without making Ram totally bad and without totally dismissing him. I mean, because a lot of people would say in order to give Sita a strong voice, you've got to be really hard on Ram. But this is very much a novel about a relationship. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think you're absolutely right. And one of the reasons it took me a long time to write this, that I wanted to understand that relationship. I wanted to understand Ram's very difficult and painful decisions, painful for Sita, but also painful for himself, and certainly painful for us as readers when he rejects her and then he rejects her again. And I wanted to understand that. You are absolutely right in, I didn't want to make this a novel about Ram bashing. That was not the point of the novel. Sita is complete and wonderful in herself. Nobody has to be put down in order for us to understand how wonderful she is. So that was not my project. And Sita herself, although she is hurt by Ram in very deep ways, she never hates him. She is able to forgive him. And I wanted to really bring that up and understand that. What does she see in Ram that allows her to do that? So I hope I have created a complex relationship between them. That was my intention. A relationship that is made tragic because one person chooses public duty over what the heart wants.
Would you read us a little bit?
Sure. I will read to you, I'll read to you a little segment where as many of you know, I'll just tell you the bare bones of the story. So Ram and Sita, prince and princess of Ayodhya, about to become king. Ram is about to be coronated, but instead, because of complicated promises that his father made, he is now sent to the forest, 14 years of banishment. Sita decides to go with him against everybody's wishes, including Ram's. And I think that's a wonderful moment where she stands up and says, "No way, I'm not going to stay here in this palace with all these old in-laws."
With these in-laws. Yeah.
You're going to go have all these adventures. My place is by your side, and I want to go with you. And, it is a decision made out of love and youth and the desire for adventure, all of those things, which we don't necessarily associate with the traditional interpretation of Sita. And for 13 years, they have a wonderful time. Then, for many complicated reasons, she's abducted by Ravan, and she spends a year in his palace, in his island of Lanka. She's actually interred, we could say she is kept captive in his forest. And in fact, forests become very important in Sita's life, thus the title, The Forest of Enchantments. Through each experience in a forest, she grows and she changes. And of course, the ultimate forest will be where she's again banished when she's pregnant with her babies. But I wanted to read to you from where Ram has now defeated Ravan, and Sita is delighted. She hasn't seen him all of this time, and she's really looking forward to their reunion. But Ram says, "I have done my duty by you. I have rescued you, but I cannot take you back because you will be considered impure by the people of Ayodhya, and, I can't do that to them. So you go where you want. You can stay here with Vibhishan, who's the new king of Lanka. You can go with Sugriv, the monkey king who helped Ram, but you can't come back to Ayodhya." The traditional interpretation often is, at this point, Ram asks Sita to go through pariksha, a test by fire to prove her purity. When I read my sources, interestingly, I discovered he does not. He just says to her, "You go, I'm done." And she is the one who says, "Wait a minute." And I'll read to you from that point.
I can hold up the mic.
Thank you. So he has just said, "This is what I owe the people of Ayodhya." And she says, "What do you owe me? Don't I have any rights?" He says, "I owe you safety and comfort, and that's all. I've freed you, this is it." And this is what she says. "It's not in your power to free me," I said to Ram, and I too spoke calmly. "The gods bound us at our wedding with Agni Dev, the holy fire, as witness, and they know I am pure and blameless. Yes, I wanted the golden deer, but that was a mistake, a folly, not a sin. Yes, Ravan has touched this bundle of flesh and bones and blood. Using his magic trickery, he took on the appearance of a sadhu and dragged me against my will and effort into his chariot. I tried my best to stop him. I couldn't. Am I to be punished because he was physically stronger? If you reject me now, word will travel all across Bharatvarsha, and men everywhere will feel that they too can reject a wife who has been abducted or even been touched against her will. Countless women, innocent women, as innocent as I am, will be shunned and punished because of your act. Is that dharma? Is that what you want?" And she pauses, and Ram has no answer. And then she says that you can tell me what you're going to do, but you can't tell me what I'm going to do with my life. And she says, "I'm making my decision." And so she says to Lakshman, "Brother-in-law, I must ask you to do one last thing for me. Build me a fire. There is nothing left for me on this earth, now that my husband, whom I love more than my own self, who has been in my heart and my prayers every single day since I was taken by Ravan, has shamed me and rejected me so cruelly, for no fault of my own, in front of this entire assembly. Therefore, I've decided to end my life today. So Sita is the one who decides. She's going to live by her own terms. She's going to die by her own terms. No one else will make that decision. And she will step into a fire. And that is, I feel, her victory. And then, of course, the god of fire will come and he will proclaim her innocence and he will tell Ram, you must take her. But I love how the original Ramayana gives her the agency, and we've forgotten this over the years, that she has so much agency, she has so much strength. She makes the noble decision. Sita makes the decision about her life. And what's wonderful about Sita is she doesn't have a lot of choices, but she takes the best choice, the strongest choice, and she makes that happen.
So in your other books, let's say non-mythological books, although many of your books contain elements of folklore and mythology, threads of mythology woven into them. But one of the certainly common themes that run through these books is women's experiences in the present, in the contemporary moment. How do you see your work addressing that area?
No, I'm very interested in women's experience. And as with the epic texts, I feel that if we look down at literature down the ages, again, the woman's voice is not heard as often. The woman is often not in the center of the story. She is not, her mind and how she thinks about things has not been the focus. Many of the tales are told by men, interpreting the woman in a certain way. So my project has been to understand the woman as I do and to place her in the center of a story, often as narrator, but sometimes, in omniscient narrations. But I'm just interested in the woman's story. I'm just interested in the complexity of her character, the modern woman, especially the immigrant woman. Myself, being an immigrant woman, I understand, and many of you in this audience, you have come from other places, other countries, other cultures, or your ancestors have. It is a very complex, at once wonderful and challenging experience. And I felt that it's so important to write about that experience for me, just to understand it, for me to share with my own community, both here and in India, and for me to share with a larger audience, because as you've heard from the many wonderful introducers of this program, that multiplicity of understanding where we reach across cultures to each other through literature is so important. I think we can learn to understand each other in stories almost better than in most other places. So that has been a big project of mine. It's just an interest. And of course, it has been influenced because I think as writers and human beings, different parts of our lives influence each other. So the activist work that I've been doing now for about 30 years in the field of domestic violence and trafficking has really also made me think about the woman's story and the many dangerous places in which women find themselves, and how often with great grace they deal with these challenges, they even deal with tragedy, and they come out of it to live strong new lives.
You reminded me of the fact that your heroine in your first novel, Mistress of Spices, Tilo, she is a South Asian woman. She is immigrant in a way in the United States, although she gets here by...
She comes from elsewhere.
She comes in a strange way, but yeah.
Yes.
But she's an immigrant, and she is drawn into the narratives of many people. And there are many people in the Indo-American community, but there are also an African-American boy, and then this very important character who is Native American, so you have this kind of interesting interaction between an Indian and a Indian, the other kind of Indian.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Yes, in Mistress of Spices, I really wanted to look at the many challenges that, of course, the Indian American community faces, but also communities of color, and where they can come together to strengthen each other, and how often, sadly, there's a lot of, what shall I say, a lot of, like distrust of each other, even though we are all communities who are being challenged in often many similar ways, but it's hard for us to come together. And Mistress of Spices is about a shop, which is a magical shop of spices where people can come in. And Thilo, she has the special power. When you walk into her shop, she'll look at you and she will be able to read your heart and she will know what you need. And she'll give you a spice infused with those powers. Now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for the story, things sometimes work out the way she wants, and sometimes they don't. And then there are further complications. But I really wanted to bring...
The spices have minds of their own.
The spices are powers of their own as well. But I wanted to bring together, I don't know, a cast that shows this wonderful, multiplicitous community of America.
Well, maybe you've answered the last question I have down here for you, but I was going to ask you about how your books address the immigrant experience, and you remarked recently that you saw them as making a political statement, and I wanted to invite you to expand on that, because I don't think everybody would necessarily see your books as political in that way.
Yes, I definitely think of my books as political, because I think every time we invite people into a world that perhaps they're not familiar with, and perhaps they have, I don't know, preconceptions about them, and we invite them to come and look at it again and look at it from inside of a character, we hope we are changing things. We hope we are creating understanding. As a reader, that has certainly been my case whenever I've read about cultures and communities other than my own. I learn many different things, but then I see how on a level we are human. We want the same things. We fear the same things. We love the same things. And we just want people to understand that. And I think especially now, I think in moments of strife, the immigrant experience becomes particularly important. A moment like that was soon after 9/11, where there was so much fear about the other. And it's very important, I think, then to look into the life of the other to see who they really are, and not maybe what media is telling us or what groups of people are telling us. And I think we are going through such a time again now when the immigrant, the migrant is being marginalized, is being seen as the reason for many of America's problems, and people are no longer seeing the human element of our immigrant communities. Not to say people are forgetting that who among us, only a very few can say we are not from immigrant cultures, right? So I hope this is a good time for me to remind people of that, to share these cultures, these characters from my immigrant culture with everybody here so that we can celebrate our common humanity. We can laugh and weep at the same things.
How do you teach creative writing? I'm curious about this.
Yes, the question is about my other life, right? So because I'm also a teacher of creative writing, as you heard, I teach at the wonderful, I have to give a little plug for my wonderful program, internationally acclaimed and ranked program at the University of Houston. I love teaching if I had 2 lives to live, I would live each one like full-time writer, full-time teacher, and of course, and maybe I need 3 full-time activists, right? So, but I love teaching because not only is it wonderful to work with younger writers and who are just shaping their first stories, and some of them, they may be shaping their first books, but they're very, very accomplished. So I learned so much from them. And it's just wonderful to interact and learn together. And it's great because sometimes I can see things about their stories and novels that they can't yet see, which is very true of all of us as writers. I have a writers group. My writer friends tell me all the things that I can't see about my writing. That helps my writing get better. So I love that. And of course, I have an agenda, which is I bring in as much multicultural literature into my classrooms as possible so that these new writers coming up are influenced by these many literary traditions, and they become comfortable with these traditions, and they see the value of these traditions. So I love that. My students really, they are like my kids, but more wonderful because I only have to deal with their happy moments. So they graduate, they go away.
I hope your sons are not watching this.
Oh, my sons get very angry when I say that. They're like, they are not your kids. We are your kids. But like years later, when they publish a book, they will write to me, and I feel so happy in their joy. So teaching has been just wonderful for me on many levels.
Good.
And yes, you can teach creative writing. I can't create the talent. They come with the talent. But I can sharpen it, I can hone it, I can focus it for them.
Do you use a workshopping approach?
Yes, I use workshops mostly. Although I teach classes, I teach a class called India in the Writer's Eye, where I take many Indian writers from different ages, as well as people from outside the culture who've written about India. But it's still workshop-based, as in we study the literature, but then they have to come up with something where they are looking at a culture either from the outside or from the inside, and becoming aware of the many nuances and dangers as we do that.
Going back to the Ramayana, if we could, the Ramayana, because of its traditional emphasis on sort of masculine, kingly power and royal order and hierarchy and subservience to royal order, it has been a very politicized text in many contexts in India, and particularly in recent times. And I wondered how you felt going to the JLF with the Indian edition. The Indian edition of Forest of Enchantments came out first.
Yes, they wanted the worldwide release in India, and I felt that was the right thing to do.
But did you feel any trepidation?
Yes, I was terrified. Okay. We had a conversation before we went to India. I'm like, I'm scared going to India. What if everybody hates my book and then they'll hate me also? But I'm so thankful. I'm like completely grateful to God and to Mother Sita that truly everybody loved it. All the reviews were wonderful. And I think people just resonated with my project, which was to show Sita in all of her wonder, in all of her strength, in all of her tragedy and her love, and to show how she was so relevant for women today, that she was a timeless icon of strength. She's the first, as far as I know, single mother in literature who brings up her children wonderfully in the forest, and she brings them up, teaching them the right things. She says, I'll teach you everything you need in order to be a great king, but I'll teach you more so that you'll never treat a woman like your father has treated me. And she is the one who says no more compromise when she's asked to undergo another test by fire. She speaks in the passage where I read, she speaks against victim shaming. These are all very current things that women all over the world, and certainly in India as well, are going through. So I think people resonated with her strength, her quiet strength. She's never strident. She never has to hate anyone in order to make her own point. It took me 10 years to understand her strength. I could not have written this book when I was younger and more militant myself. I think I learned a great deal writing this book, and I'm just thankful that people understood that that was the project. And also, I think because I was very careful with my research, they couldn't say, you made this up, because I brought it to life. But every single kernel is in one important Ramayana or another.
She also has she also has healing abilities.
She does.
Yes,
She
like
is a
many
daughter of the
Indian
earth.
women.
Yes, yes. She is a daughter of the earth. She has a connection to the earth and to the forest and to herbs. She has that power. So she is a healer. She goes around with that healing energy, and I wanted to bring that out in this book.
Well, I think we could go to Q&A.
Yes.
Unless you have more that you want to
No,
say
I'm
right now.
happy to hear from the
I would
audience.
love to take-
Q&A is wonderful. Praise is also acceptable.
All right. How about criticism?
Maybe afterwards, during book signing.
Sure.
Add that Chitra's book, when she released it in India earlier this year, was the highest-selling book of all time. And Jeffrey Archer got really upset because he was like, "You mean I'm not the highest-selling writer this
Go
year?"
back into it.
But it was Chitra.
And I was more surprised than anyone else. This is not what I expected.
I will bring the microphone to you.
So I grew up in Uttar Pradesh, and near my hometown is a Sita Ki Rasoi, as there are many Sita Ki Rasois. But I feel that among the grassroots, among the people, there is a lot of sympathy for Sita, and she is seen as a strong figure. It is not, Ramchandra is sometimes questioned in his behavior towards her. When my grandmother used to fight with her dhobi, she would say that your community was the one that cast doubts on her purity. And many times in Uttar Pradesh, we say, Siya Var Ramchandra ki jai. Sita is the first person celebrated in this.
Yes, and that's wonderful. And one of the books that I researched that was very helpful to me was Namita's book, In Search of Sita. And one of the things I really loved there is all of the folk songs that say exactly what you say, where these women are saying, you know, Sita's like our daughter. She's ours. And they are, many of them, they're funny little moments out of Sita's personal life. And I've tried to do that in this book also, not just Sita as this iconic figure, but like when she comes to Ayodhya, for instance, she's coming out of Mithila, which had a very simple setup. King Janak, Sunaina, her mother, that's it. Here she comes, and Dashrath has like 10,000 wives. He has some major ones that we all know, but there's a lot of women, and they're all like fighting and politicking, and Sita is able to handle that. She figures out how to handle that. Kaushalya is not the king's favorite, but Sita does some things to make Kaushalya's status improve. So I wanted to bring in these female moments where what's going on in the female part of the palace.
Just add to that, for those that don't know Hindi, Sita Rasoi means kitchen. And so Sita's kitchen is this little locale that you mentioned. And in fact, there are numerous ones all over India because Ram and Sita wandered around for years in exile. And Sita was always making, chapatis or whatever. But these are places that often women particularly resonate with.
Yes.
Mother Sita cooked here.
Mother Sita cooked here. Mother Sita slept here. She's very real to us.
Both India and the United States have rich ethnic diversity, but I've been disturbed at seeing how much anti-Muslim feeling that there is in India. How serious do you consider it to be, and what's the best thing writers and others can do in response?
Well, I think we are going through a moment, as people said, both in India and in many governments of the world, we're kind of in a nationalistic moment, a moment that is against multiplicity. I think as writers, we want to bring all these, I'm just speaking for myself, we want to make all the stories heard. We want people to understand that every story has its validity. And if a particular, let's say, a public story is being created by political parties or political figures, both here in India, William Dalrymple mentioned in England, maybe in other countries of Europe, we want to press for multiplicity. We want the voices to be heard. We want to look at people as human first, and then their ethnicity, and then their religion. That is my belief, and that we should all, writers, yes, we do it one way, but everyone in this audience can do something about it, and I hope you will.
Well, a follow-up on that question, was there any differential in acceptance? Your book was very successful. Was it different from the Muslim population of India versus the Hindu population? And then the second question, it seems like that what happened to Sita, this is a historical theme. Could you comment on similarities, say, by Shakespeare's The Rape of Lucretia? It seemed like a similar story.
Yes, I'll answer the first one. As far as I could tell, the reception to Sita was across communities, because I had, let's say, journalists from different religious backgrounds interviewing me. And I think they all felt the strength of Sita as a character, an important woman for all of us to know more about. So I was very pleased to see that people from all kinds of backgrounds really responded well, because it is a human story. It is a story of problems that women, not only Hindu women, but women of all kinds are facing. So if Sita's standing up against victim shaming, she's standing up for all women. So I felt that that was the spirit in which the book was received, and I was very thankful for that. Please repeat your second question one more time.
Just the comparison to other stories that, like
Yes. Yes, you were referring to the rape of Lucretia, but also many other stories. If you think of, the Iliad, the Odyssey, things that happen to women, how women become victims of war and they're distributed to the winners. This is a human story. Things that happen to women have been happening for a long time, and we have all in our different communities come across it. And I think people have. They have now, in many cultures, and I read a number of the epics that have now been retold from women's points of view, and I think there's a real impetus to retell these women's stories, and especially to redecipher violence against women for what it really is, not something for the woman to be ashamed of. She did not do it. For her to stand up and say, if there's someone to be ashamed, that should be someone else. That should be the perpetrator, not me.
Can I just add, from a kind of Ramayana studies perspective, another answer for you before I take the next question, which is, when we talk about many Ramayanas, we're talking about texts that go across religious and ethnic communities.
Yes.
in South Asia and in Southeast Asia. So there are Buddhist Ramayanas, Jain Ramayanas, Muslim Ramayanas.
Muslim Ramayanas, I looked at that.
The story has been, very widely disseminated and has often been very positively received in Islamic communities. Unfortunately, the communal polarization that's going on in India today is driving a wedge, between communities that often did share narratives, and being very aggressive now and saying, no, this is not Islamic, or no, this is Hindu. The Ramayana, in many ways, is not a Hindu text.
It is a universal text. Yeah. It invites everybody who is willing to be invited into it. I really feel that. That is my hope with sharing it with people in this country. It's a great story. I hope people will resonate with it, no matter what background they come from.
This gentleman here,
I've got one over here too.
I am wisely staying out of this debate.
Confused. Oh, okay. Ladies first.
Okay, being an immigrant myself, since I was 11 years old in this country, I was wondering whether one of your hesitations in presenting your book at the festival in Jaipur was whether people would critique that you're too westernized.
Yes, that was one of my many fears, like, you don't even live here, how can you write about our story? But I think, what I realized is that, at least for people who read, now if someone doesn't even read the book and says that, I can't do anything. But when people read the book, I think they felt the spirit in which it was written, which was an inclusive spirit, not an exclusive spirit, and certainly not a spirit as in, I, living in America, know more about the Ramayana. That was certainly not the spirit. It was truly, I wrote it with a great deal of humility and prayer. May the story come out right. May the story do the good that I hope it will do in the world. And that was the spirit in which I wrote it. And I think maybe people felt that, because I do think when we read, when we open ourselves to a book, if we really open ourselves to a book, a lot of our prejudices begin to fall away. One of my favorite quotes about books is the one by Kafka, where he says, a book should be, I'm paraphrasing, a book should be an axe to shatter the frozen sea that is inside each of us. And that is my hope in reading and in writing. And I'm always just thankful when a little bit of that happens.
It's an affirmation that you're India's daughter.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This lady was stacked up. Okay.
Hi. It's such an honor to see you, first things first. But I think that as a student who's grown up in India, sitting through countless hours of Hindi class, reading the Ramayana and Mahabharata, I think it's taken a lot to appreciate these characters, I think, through traditional retellings especially. And I wanted to know, how did your own journey start in seeing these characters as strong, powerful figures, especially Draupadi, if you could?
Right, so the question is, how did my journey start? My journey started, as I was mentioning, with the stories my grandfather told, and then in stories that we would read in school and in class. And the women were always there, but it was like there was a little scrim between me and these women. They were not given to me in their own words, in their own thoughts. Their actions were described, often briefly, and often from the male angle. And I just started thinking, but what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What made them do this? What was their motivation? None of which was given to me in the original text. All the events were given. But it gave me a lot of space to think about who these women really were. Especially with Panchali, where I started. It was like, okay, here she is being brought, one of the seminal scenes in the Mahabharata. She's being dragged into the the court of the Kauravas. She's going to be unclothed in front of them, the greatest shame in that situation. What is she really feeling? What's going on through her mind? When she closes her eyes, what are the pictures inside of her head? So that is the space that I wanted to explore in both of these books.
There was somebody, Linda.
Thank you, Chitra and Philip. It's been a wonderful discussion. Since you identify as an activist, and so do I want to raise a question about the political situation in India today, not to mention over here. You said that the many Ramayanas show the rich, and you celebrate the rich multiplicity of culture in India. I want to have it mentioned that there have been many attacks against the multiplicity of the Ramayana in the political atmosphere of India the last 25, 30 years, starting with people destroying hubs of Ayodhya, start with people going into the Delhi University and physically threatening until they took Ramanujan's 300 Ramayanas off the syllabus at Delhi University, shouting and identifying Ram as their patron, not just a fringe, fanatics, but the ruling ideology today in India. I could mention worse things, but you know what they all are. I think that should just enter into the conversation today. Thank you.
See, that is a good question. It is a difficult question. I think in my writing more and more, I am influenced by Sita's way of thinking. This is a huge problem. In what way can I best make a dent against it? And I feel it is by being inclusive, by, in my books, not just this one, but in my books, bringing in characters from different religions, showing them from their insides. For instance, my book, One Amazing Thing, a major character. There are Hindus, there are Christians, there are Muslims, and I want to show their humanity. For me, that's the way. For me, it is to bring in these other Ramayans from different traditions and make it part of my story and make it clear in my introduction that that's what I'm doing. Other activists will do other things. I have to work where I feel my passion lies.
And if I could add from my point of view, I'm doing a 7-volume translation of the Hindi Ramayana of Tulsidas, 16th century Ramayana. One of the things that I've been aware of in India is that the people who scream the loudest and commit these terrible acts of hatred and violence that you mentioned, they'll do it in the name of Ram, yeah, and it's always Jai Ram, and by the way, I always say Jai Sita Ram. I never say Jai Ram, but
Philip, bye.
Yeah. But they generally don't know the Ramayana well.
They don't.
They may have
They
read a
don't.
comic book. They may have watched some of the TV serial.
Or someone has talked to them about
They don't know
it.
the Ramayana. So I feel like even in my humble effort of translating a text, I'm trying to at least put the material out there that people can read the original and see how complicated, how contested it is, and how many layers there are to it. I mean, we have to be active as well in
It is a
the
challenge.
politics of the moment, for sure.
It is a challenge. That is exactly one of the things that I'm hoping that as people read Sita's story, which is based on many Ramayanas, they realize that when people are saying, and I hope people will continue to say after reading this book, may you be like Sita to their daughters, but it's a different Sita now. And if they only understand that that is the Sita that has been lost to us over centuries of patriarchal interpretation, maybe has been lost to us as we lose this kind of multiplicity that invites others into our culture and not feel threatened by them. Maybe something good will come out of it. That is my hope.
We have time.
Inshallah.
One more question, please. There are several.
Well, this gentleman has been waiting for a long time.
Or two quick ones. I do see you. There's a lady behind you that's getting the mic right now. We're just letting it go till 12:35
Because you are such a wonderful person.
Yes, exactly.
Hi, thank you. If we could jump to a different book. I read Sister of My Heart and really loved it. And one of the things I loved about the book was the glimpse it gave of what it was like for girls growing up in India. And I wondered if that was your experience growing up and if that was a typical experience for girls.
Okay. So this is a question about Sister of My Heart, where two cousins grow up in a very old and traditional household in Kolkata. And, I come from the city of Kolkata, and I have been in homes like that. And so a lot of it was taken from what I saw around me, though as I think my husband will be quick to agree, and my sons certainly, my life is nothing as exciting as what happens to these women. In fact, they will go many adventures, but it is what they are going through is what I saw around me. So I think a lot of my writing is gleaned from my understanding and observation of life. As I write more and more, I am less and less autobiographical. I feel that as a writer, that is better for me because then the story is allowed free rein. The story can go where it wants to in its power. The characters can do what they need to do, and I'm not invested in any kind of controlling way. So, but that was the time.
Power
That was
of
the time
fiction.
when I grew up in Kolkata. Yes, what did you say? The power of fiction. And I do believe that that is what's so wonderful about fiction. I greatly admire nonfiction writers, but I love the fact that fiction gives me this whole world to create. And hopefully it's a world then that I can invite readers into.
One more. I actually have a very quick announcement before we take one more question. If you ordered a box lunch, there's still a whole bunch of them downstairs, and they'll only be available for the next half an hour. So they'll go away at 1 o'clock. And if you don't know where they are, you have to go downstairs and go all the way to the other side of the library, and you will find them. Okay.
And could I say one thing?
Chitra,
I
you
know
can-
you have more questions. Please come to the book signing area. I'll be happy to answer all
yes.
questions
Books.
over there.
Chitra will be signing books right downstairs after this session is over. Philip's in the next session, so you'll have to wait until that's over before you get him. But anyway, they'll be downstairs. Do you have a mic? Yeah. Oh, he had his, I know. Did you still have a question? Because there's another man who's really, all right. Sorry.
Downstairs.
I don't know what happened to the other microphone, but I'll get it to you. And this will truly be our last question.
Thank you. Chitra, huge fan of your writing. In fact, you've inspired me as a writer. So
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I know this is probably an unfair question. I've read most of your books. So do you have a favorite
Do I have a favorite?
among your books?
No, not really. The books are, they're kind of like your children. Only better because I have 2 boys who went through their teenage years. Now they're over it. Because with your books, you never have to wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning and think, what is my book doing right now? But I think the newest is always my favorite. So right now, The Forest of Enchantments, because I think I've put everything I've learned about writing into this book. So, thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Chitra.
Thank you, Philip. Bye.
Thank you very much, Chitra.